Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this day today, the 13th day of July 2023. Hey, there's so much for the State of Origin 2023. Well, last night, New South Wales beat Queensland 24-10, but guess what? Queensland won the series, having won 2 out of the 3 matches. So that was already there, but they could have made 3 in a straight, which has not been done in quite some time. But especially now that it was in the New South Wales home ground, the Accor Stadium. So 24-10 last night. So last night's match was won by New South Wales, but overall winner of the 2023 State of Origin is Queenslanders. Go the Queenslanders. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now, let's get the news in brief.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has thanked Australia for its pledge to provide another 30 Bushmaster armoured vehicles to Ukraine. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made the announcement after meeting with Mr Zelensky at the annual NATO summit in Lithuania yesterday. Mr Albanese says Australia will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. The New South Wales government has set up an independent panel to oversee its promised cashless gaming trial. The 16-member panel will include representatives from the club and hotel industry. The trial is also set to be expanded, with a roadmap to be handed down by the panel for gaming reforms by November next year. Sydney neurosurgeon Charlie Teo is yet to respond to a finding by the health watchdog that he's guilty of unsatisfactory professional conduct. The Medical Professional Standards Committee found that he never should have operated on 2 women who didn't survive the surgeries. The Commission ordered he be reprimanded and imposed conditions on his registration which will make it difficult for him to work in Australia. And Succession has dominated the nominations for the Emmy Awards with 27 nods for its final season, including 1 for Australia's Sarah Snook. In an Emmys first, the show's Brian Cox, Jeremy Strong and Kieran Culkin will all battle it out for lead actor. The Last of Us scored 24 nominations, followed by The White Lotus, while on the comedy front, Ted Lasso has scored 21 nods.
There you are, up to date on Australian Indian Radio this morning on the 13th day of July. It's 19 degrees and cloudy day today here in Brisbane, but again, it's still very good out there. Ladies and gentlemen, right now, moving on, let's take a look at what we've always been talking about, energy. As we know, energy is what's needed, and there have been so many different forms of energies as we have evolved through times. Whenever a new source is discovered, it's uploaded until it's found to have some side effects. Then we have to go close that and look at alternative forms of energies. But when we look at energy, we need to, today we cannot survive with energy. So, electricity and everything just depends on our life revolves around that. But when it comes to paying for electricity, how much are we paying for energy?
After a busy Saturday morning, the Turners are home and powering up.
Come on, I need to get that guy. He's crazy.
The heating is on, there's washing to be done, children to feed and entertain. This family of 5 uses a lot of power. So when their retailer AGL said their electricity bills were about to almost double, it was a huge shock.
I thought to myself, we're in a cost of living crisis. The main thing they said was, we don't have a better deal for you than that.
Will Turner's much cheaper 2-year energy contract had expired, and he was being moved onto a regulated default offer. On the same day, he read AGL was expecting to double its profits.
I just felt there was a real lack of balance to what I was observing. I was this whopping huge, price increase on the one hand, and then I look on the news and AGL's telling its shareholders, it's going to be a great year ahead. We're going to make hay while the sun shines. And I'm like, well, the sun's not shining on us. I just couldn't believe it.
Yes, of course, companies are there in for a profit, but of course, the margin and the balance is what really needs to be out there. And the government has quite a lot of regulations in place as well. but consumers really do need to be protected. Right now, the next news, which was in our lead-up opening ones, we covered that Australia will donate 30 more Bushmasters to Ukraine.
The Prime Minister agreed to the support during a meeting with Ukraine's president on the sidelines of the NATO summit overnight in Lithuania.
It adds to the 90 Australian personnel carriers that are already being used in Ukraine to move troops in and out of frontline areas. It all comes amid the backdrop of Ukraine's push to join NATO. I spoke to our Europe Bureau Chief Steve Kinnaid, who's been at the summit in Vilnius.
Well, it started with a bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Albanese and President Zelensky. That started with a hug and a handshake while the cameras were rolling. Both made opening statements. Prime Minister Albanese he praised the leadership of President Zelensky and also the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people. Then President Zelensky thanked Australia for standing shoulder to shoulder with his people. Then the meeting went behind closed doors. We don't know exactly what they discussed. No doubt some of Australia's long-term commitments for helping Ukraine during their war with Russia. And then Prime Minister Albanese came out and he announced that Australia would be gifting 30 Bushmasters to Ukraine. Now, they've already sent 90 over. Certainly when I was in Ukraine a few weeks ago, we spoke to frontline soldiers who said what an important resource they were. I spoke to some soldiers who, in the Battle of Bakhmut, were under fire from Russian artillery, and they said that this vehicle protected them. So it means a lot to get these vehicles, and here's what Prime Minister Albanese said today.
The Bushmasters are a symbol of Australia's support for Ukraine. They are valued very much by Ukrainian defence personnel and have saved their lives, just as in the past they have been responsible for saving Australian lives.
And it seems President Zelensky was in a slightly more upbeat mood today, Steve.
That's right. As we discussed yesterday, he had a big spray on Twitter about not getting a proper time frame for NATO membership. Now, that hasn't changed, but there were some developments today that probably pleased him a little bit more. Perhaps he's had time to consider his comments as well. But the G7 nations made a big announcement today about creating a framework, a security framework where G7 nations and other like-minded nations can go off and do bilateral security deals with Ukraine. And that's seen as a very positive thing for Ukraine, as is the fact that there's been more pledges for weapons. So yes, the summit ended here today with President Zelensky far more upbeat, but don't expect him to stop knocking on the door to try and get some kind of pathway to NATO membership. As with all the requests they've been making for weapons, think of the tanks, think of the fighter jets that they want. They keep asking and they keep asking, and often they get what they want. So don't expect President Zelensky to stop pushing to try and get some kind of pathway to NATO membership.
Steve.
And you got to appreciate, his drive. He's always out there for the country, and he will, his drive to get Ukraine into the NATO accepted he's always pushing for it. Well, right now we've got a bit of a footage, CCTV footage it is, but of the moment when the two guys set fire to the Collingwood shop. And there you go. So as I mentioned, these days, you have to be careful where the CCTV cameras, maybe so much things, that gets covered. And sometimes you look at those reels on social media and you wonder, wow, if there was no camera in a spot, some of those incidents would have gone, unnoticed. There are many accidents, there are many freak things that have happened, but they have been captured on camera. So the meaning that someone did have their camera on and rolling at the time when those things happen. Right now, let's look at ears found to be unique, identified equivalent to fingerprints and DNA.
This is a multi-ethnic study where we have collected samples from 6 different countries, and we have collected samples from 1,400 people, and we analyzed more than 2,000 ear photos. So what we did was, after collecting the images, we have chosen 4 different regions from the ear. So we did measurements on those 4 different regions, and based on those measurements, we have given a unique code for each individual. And our study findings showed that the probability of 2 persons to have a same code is very, very less, which in turn proved that, these ears are unique for each individual. See, normally, because ear research is not something new, because it was dated back to more than a century. But if you look into the old research, most of the researchers have selected different regions from the ear. If you see at the external ear, we have more than 10 parts on that, and it's really difficult for us to locate the parts. But what we did in our research is that we have chosen very few regions which were found to be easily recognizable, reproducible, and the chances of doing error is very less. So once we chose.
So there you are. You don't only have your fingerprints, and you have your ear on the spot as well. Well, good luck with that study and that research. Right now, we know, still staying on some of the bit of a medical field, is that our flu jab uptake this year has been a little bit slow.
Adelaide pharmacist Greg Scarlett was overrun with customers wanting flu vaccines during the COVID pandemic. But this year, demand has plummeted.
Not just 1 or 2, I'm talking 20-30% less probably than what we did last year.
It's a trend happening across the country. The number of flu vaccinations administered in Australia this year has fallen by 17.7% compared to this time last year. Every state and territory has recorded a drop, with South Australia down more than 20%, and New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland seeing similarly large falls.
It's relatively concerning because we know that the flu cases are on the rise, and flu can be really nasty for some people.
We may see more people presenting to hospitals or ending up hospitalised, and of course influenza is a serious disease, so it can result in deaths.
The flu vaccine is free for vulnerable groups such as older people and those with medical conditions. But health workers say cost is still a barrier to lifting vaccination rates.
For a family of 4 where nobody's covered by the National Immunisation Program, that could cost $80 to $100 for the family, so it's a significant expense.
We think it should be a free vaccine for everyone, then at least providers could get on with providing it rather than trying to work out who's going to fund it.
Vaccine fatigue after the pandemic is also turning people off flu jabs.
But I have noticed some of my patients are saying they're a bit over it. They've had their COVID vaccines, they've had other vaccines, they don't want anything more.
But with Australia already reporting more than 116,000 flu cases and 107 deaths this year, doctors are urging people to roll up their sleeves and get vaccinated. Stephanie Richards.
There you go. Roll up your sleeves and get that vaccination, get the jab and stay safe. Well, next up, we'll take a look at the Reserve Bank of Australia. Well, looking at RBA, we know that, RBA regulates the interest rates and things like that based upon what's happening out there, cost of living, the inflation, CPI, taking all of those things in index. So, if it is a formula that is in place, if it is dependent upon many factors, does it matter who is running it, who is on the board, who is the governor? Of course, their discretion also counts, their conduct, and because many of these things are hypothetical. They look at the situation now and they have to make a prediction moving into forward, what they need to do to make sure that there is a correction, and based upon that judgment, the entire board or the team decides on whether to raise interest rate or not. But there is a raft of changes being planned for RBA.
The Reserve Bank's Governor Philip Lowe has announced the RBA's board is set for a shake-up following a review of the central bank. So from 2024, the board will only meet 8 times a year rather than the current 11, with the Governor to hold a press conference following each meeting to explain the board's interest rate decision. Rate statements will be from the board, or rather the Monetary Committee, setting the rates, not just the Governor. And the committee making those decisions will meet bank staff to canvass a wide range of views.
But as times change, we need to change too. The world we're facing is increasingly complex, and it's been right to re-examine how we take and communicate monetary policy decisions and how we're managed internally. So the board and the bank staff have supported the review process, and we've been working constructively through the recommendations.
Let's get some analysis of what it means. We're joined by the CEO of the Grattan Institute and economist Danielle Wood. Hi, Danielle.
Good morning.
What did you make of what Philip Lowe had to say yesterday about these changes?
Look, I think they're a really sensible set of changes. They come out of the review of the Reserve Bank, which actually looked at their processes and said, there's a number of areas where they can do things better. This is really bringing us in line more with international practice. We're very unusual. In the 11 meetings a year, what we're seeing is, the board is on this kind of treadmill of making decisions, that they don't, necessarily have a huge amount of change in information between meetings. So slowing it down, giving them more information, more analysis, may well lead to more considered interest rate decisions.
And the press conferences are interesting as well, because, that's what happens over in the US with the Fed, but it's actually extraordinary to think before Philip Lowe, there weren't regular press conferences by an RBA governor at all.
At all, that's right. So, they do, the governor and the senior staff of the bank do a lot of speeches in more sort of controlled environments, but I think there is something to the fact standing up immediately after you've made that decision and answering questions on it will improve the transparency and all of our understanding of, what's actually feeding into those Reserve Bank decisions that are so crucial.
Had any of these changes been made 2 years ago, 3 years ago, would we have seen any different outcomes in the trajectory of interest rate rises?
Look, it is difficult to say, but if you think of, the key criticisms, one criticism is that perhaps interest rates were too high in the pre-COVID world. And I think, there is an argument that if the bank had to account for those at the time, that might have put pressure on some of the thinking. The other big criticism that we're all aware of course, is the kind of wrong guidance that was given coming out of COVID that interest rates would stay low for a long time. So it's difficult to kind of say for sure that things would look different, but you're certainly going to get hopefully a better quality of decision making and a better quality of communication.
And they'll be bringing more thinking in from outside the bank as well with this new monetary policy committee. So 4 from internally inside the bank, economists 5 from outside. Will that actually make a difference in terms of the influences on the thinking, do you think?
Look, I think that is a really important change, because what that means is around the table you are going to have a group of people with deep expertise in the questions at hand. And so, that ability to kind of test the arguments being put forward by the bank, the greater interaction with bank staff you've pointed to as well, I think allows them to bring out what is sometimes differences of opinions within the bank. So these are not straightforward issues. Often you will have a range of opinions, and I think it's really important the board are able to grapple with those and to hear those.
This was likely Philip Lowe's last speech as governor, and interestingly the Treasurer said yesterday that his successor will be one of the most important decisions that the government actually makes. Can you just explain to us, does it actually matter that much who is the governor of the RBA? Because aren't these decisions taken as a collective anyway? There's a whole bank backing. How much does it actually matter who's leading that institution?
It's an incredibly important institution, and you do need to have a very esteemed and knowledgeable economist, I think, leading that board discussion. So it is definitely a really important appointment. But if the question is, if it was someone else rather than Philip Lowe in that governor seat over the last year, would they have made fundamentally different decisions? I think the answer is no.
Pretty tough gig.
It's a tough gig, and it will be a tough gig for whoever takes it on.
And just quickly before I let you go, he actually sounded more dovish in terms of future interest rate rises in that speech, I thought, than in recent statements. So we might be able to get out without any more?
Yeah, so certainly I think he was a lot more balanced, and it seemed to suggest the possibility that, if inflation does keep coming down, we may not have to see any more rate rises. On the other hand, there was a lot of on the one hand, on the other hand, there's certainly potential to move more if the data isn't going the way they like.
So I'm glad that question did come up about does it make a difference who is in that chair? Isn't there all these external forces that govern that and the board, and isn't that a collective decision on whether to rise or not to rise the interest rate? So based upon all of that, does it really, really matter who is in that chair. Of course, the credibility, the suitable, qualified, esteemed gentleman is needed for a position like that. But would someone else in Philip Lowe's place would have made a slightly different decision? Food for thought. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our functions and events.
Phantasmagorically magical. This is for you both.
Girl, she got married to a boy like you. She'd kick you out if she ever knew about all the you tell me that you do. Dirty, dirty boy. You know everyone is talking on the scene. I hear them whispering about the places that you've been and how you don't know how to keep your business clean.
Namaste, hi and hello to everyone. This is Geeta Kapoor. I'm coming to Brisbane, Australia on the 22nd of September and to Melbourne on the 24th of September 2023 to witness some great talent on a wonderful platform called Australia's Great Dancers. This event is brought by Shaurya Entertainment and I can't wait to see the talent that it brings there. See you soon. Lots of love. God bless.
So there were, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio with all the upcoming events. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us.